Mission statement of Helicon West. Helicon West is a live reading series that brings published local writers to read alongside community members in an open, uncensored forum. In order to promote the voices of every community member and democratic ideals, we honor all levels of skill, ability, and craft. In addition to featuring published authors to give the literary arts more exposure in Cache Valley and its surrounding areas, we invite and celebrate aspiring writers from every walk of life. You can hear me all right? Okay. To find and share their voices with us. We are committed to the cause of inclusion, accessibility, and representation in our writing community. I would like to thank our sponsors, the Bear River Heritage Area, the Logan Library, Sugar House Review, the Utah Humanities, and our founder and patron saint, Star Colebrook. So thank you all. I would add to that, I don't know what to call her now, but like if we're going with bad Catholic metaphors, like the priest or father parishioner of our local areas, Britt Allen, who has taken this completely on her back to keep it going, and I really appreciate it. So, good. Quiet in the back. Okay. If you'd like to sign up during the open mic portion, which will happen after Chadd reads, please find our sign-up sheets near the beverage place back up there. Is that where they're at right now?
Yes.
Okay, cool. After our featured readers, we will get as far down the list as time permits. Each reader will have up to 7 minutes to read for us, and after 7 minutes, they will be politely, I was going to say promptly, that's different, I guess, clapped off. All of our Helicon West events are recorded and then posted to our Helicon West YouTube channel. If you do not wish to be recorded but would like to read during the open mic, please make a note by your name when you sign up so we can turn our cameras off during your turn. Okay, Helicon West is made possible by our generous sponsors and by the community we serve to help us stay in person until the new Logan Library is built, not to mention hydrated and caffeinated. There are several ways to make a donation. You can support Helicon West by donating online at sugarhousereview.com/save N-Helicon-N-West. You can scan our QR code. Do we have a QR code floating around?
It's coming.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So don't do that one yet. Okay.
Next time.
Or you can leave your sweet pocket change in our collection can back by the copy, okay? So yeah, please, if you find a way to help us out, help us to bring free literary events to our community. If something moves you, if the coffee revives you, if you get a great date out of tonight, consider leaving a tip to help us keep it going, okay? Okay, and that's the announcements for tonight. And we'll get going here. Okay, so I have the pleasure of introducing Tim King and Chadd VanZanten tonight. They are going to perform Hooks and Books, which I hear is really great. I've never been able to see it, so hopefully it's pretty good. Anyway, so I want to talk about Tim first. Let me introduce you to him. I heard about Tim long before I actually met Tim. It's kind of like hearing a train before you actually see it. It's just like all these rumblings about this kind of mountain man guy who sold fly patterns to Rainey's Flies, which, if you know fly fishing, is one of the premier fly suppliers. It's the Gucci of, okay, I'll go with that. It's the Gucci of flies. And they're gorgeous. They look like the thing they're supposed to look like. It's weird. Anyway, so this local guy selling to Rainey's, which is also local, but still, it was a really huge thing. And whose daytime job was a rocket scientist. So all of that stuff is real. Tim came to Logan in the mid-'70s and never left, right? And comes to us through Pennsylvania, and we're so glad he stayed. So the thing about Tim is he absolutely lived up to every weird hype thing that I had ever heard about him, which doesn't happen very often. The only thing that I think he got shortchanged on was how purposely kind he is. He's just a sweetheart, and I'm very lucky to call him a friend. I'm glad he's here, and I'm glad you get to see him tie his that's the show, man. It's good stuff. So, okay, not to diminish Chadd at all, but you know, that's the stuff. Okay. All right, and now let me introduce you to Chadd. Chadd, I actually met Chadd. The first time I met Chadd was at a Helicon West a long time ago. I'm not saying a long time ago is one of those weird, modest things where I don't want to say how old I am. I don't care. It's just that I don't do math well, and it was many years ago. I was sitting with, at the time I was a grad student, I was sitting with all of my, I was sitting with all of my grad student friends, and we were like, who's this local guy who's like, he's pretty good, who's that guy? And then we immediately asked him to join our writing group, and it was the most productive writing group I've ever had. I miss it all the time. It was really great. Now, Chadd's written 3 books about fly fishing and a book of short stories that he's got out here now, and he gets published in places all over the place, and I'm really happy and proud of him. He also does things like, okay, I'll take it. So, I don't think he's selling these tonight, but he does sometimes sell these. Isn't that the grossest, awesome bug you've ever seen? And the thing that makes me so mad is, like, we wrote a book together a long time ago, again, math years ago, I don't know how many, but, and when we were writing it, I was like, Chadd, you should draw something and put it in the book. And he's like, no, they're not good enough, they're not, you know, I don't want to do that. And I was like, no, they are, you should do it, like, do it. And then, I think every book since then, he's drawn things to put them in, and I'm pissed at him for that still. So, but he draws these things and they're amazing. Actually, I meant to bring this and I forgot to. He just was featured on the cover of a fancy English fly fishing journal this month called Fly Culture, which they could do better on the title, but I really like the magazine. And he drew a similar thing of a blue-winged olive that's on the cover of it, and it's dumb and gorgeous, and it looks like it's drugged and stuff. It's so good. I love it very much. So, so he does this as well, in addition to this. Let me see. Oh yeah, so when we started, sorry, that was a big tangent. When we started doing our writing group, stay everybody. Okay, when we started doing our writing group, he was bragging about fishing, and I said, oh, I'd like to learn how to fish. And he was like, yeah, sure, okay. And I was like, no, really, teach me how to fish. And if you've started fishing at all, everybody wants to fish. Like, every party I go to and they say, oh, you fish? I'd be like, yeah. They're like, will you teach me how to fish? And I'm like, sure. Anytime. You know, and nobody takes you up on it. And I kept on pestering Chadd, and he finally took me out and began to teach me how to fish, which I'm really grateful for. And I think I can say that out of everybody alive, I've fished with him and written with him the most. Like, you know, like I think he's probably written with Amanda more than me, and maybe fished more with, I don't think, probably me, because I'm all right. So, just kidding. And I could say this about Chadd, he's a much better writer than he is an angler. Okay? He's a very good writer, and I could say this too, he's a damn fine angler as well. So, but he's even better at writing. So I'm excited for y'all to hear these two guys together doing hooks and books. It's weird, you'll never see anything else like it again, I promise. And I think Chadd actually is going to do a preamble. Pardon? There's a reason, that's fair. There is a reason for that. But I think Chadd has a little preamble for this too. Oh, holy cow, I went on 10 minutes. I'm going to stop right now. Okay, so, what's that? It's getting dark, okay. Okay, so I'll let them talk now for a while. Okay, welcome these guys to the stage. So.
Thank you, Russ. That was, I didn't know you liked me that much. It's really, yeah, what Russ, he didn't mention a couple things. First thing is when we wrote our first book together, Hooks and Books was the way that we promoted it. And he was, you know, he read some of his stories from the first book, and I read mine, and Tim was here. And I think yeah, we're a little, it's a little bit of a, I'm sorry you couldn't see the classic lineup is what I'm saying. You know, it's like seeing, you know, Led Zeppelin after Bonzo died or something like that. And then the second thing that he did mention is that, yeah, I showed him a couple of things, you know, having to do with fly fishing, but he figured it out just fine. But he taught me to write about fishing. He was already writing nonfiction, and I couldn't make it work until I started going to this writing group. So yeah, all that stuff back at you. So, and one thing I want to mention really quickly is that I was riding my bike home from work today, and I crashed into an RV, and I broke my glasses. My bike is fine. The RV is pretty messed up. But my glasses were demolished. They flew into traffic, and I'm like repeatedly run over. And so I can't see anybody. I know that that's my sweetheart, and I think that's Joseph. And right behind him is that Sean?
Oh, yeah.
Sean.
Yeah.
Star. So I don't know anybody else. So I can't see you, and that might affect this all. But so I just apologize for that. Yes, what you're about to witness is called Hooks and Books. It's a performative art form that Russ and me and Tim created out of whole cloth. And if you think creating a new art form is easy, you've got another thing coming, because we've been doing this for about 6 years, and you know, it really hasn't caught on. But when it does, when every other Helicon West, you know, 2 or 3 years from now is a Hooks and Books, you know, other guys trying to get this going, and when you when you go to coffee shops and stuff and you see in Hooks and Books, you all right here are going to be able to say that I saw Tim and Russ and that other guy doing Hooks and Books, and you know, I think you'll be pretty proud of that. And the other thing that you're going to be able to say is, oh yeah, that's where I bought my copy of Chadd's book. I bought all 3 of the books there, in fact. I remember that. I remember very clearly. But yeah, this is Hooks and Books. And if you think, this is another thing I want to caution you about, if you think that this is just a gimmick that Tim and I and Russ came up with to have a dog and pony show to promote books, just like a kind of a, you know, a cheap trick, you're wrong. That is not what it is at all. This is a legitimate art form. We call it Interpretive Fly Tying, and it's where one person is going to read a piece of fish lit, we call it, fish literature. And while that's happening, this professional fly tyer, Tim King, former rocket science, former wildlife biologist, now retiree, VW mechanic, and interpretive fly performer, he's going to capture the words and the images and the ideas and the metaphors, and he's going to interpret them in the form of an exquisitely designed, crafted fly. And if Tim likes your face, or if you're nice to him, you might take one of these home. And that's going to be another thing that's going to be very special for you in the years to come, is to have one of those. This is just, I'm pumping my peas. Try to angle this. But the way this works is that I've got a couple of stories. They're from this book that released in April, called On Fly Fishing, the Bear River Watershed. It's about the Bear River here in the valley and in Wyoming and Idaho, and the tributaries and reservoirs that are attendant to the Bear River. It's about our area here. And it's about fly fishing with Russ and fly fishing with Tim and other guys, and but it's got a lot to do with the history and kind of the culture of the area. Star is in there. Other people, you know, are in there. It talks about the history of the Shoshone, the Bear River Massacre, and that sort of thing. But I'm going to read you a couple of the maybe the more lighthearted pieces, chapters from that book, and I'm going to check in with Tim to find out what he has decided to, what pattern he has decided to interpret these stories with. And so if that all kind of makes sense to you.
The mic is falling.
Oh. How embarrassing. This never happened. Seriously. So if that all makes sense to you, just please sit back and take it in, and yeah, just remember, yeah, that you were here way back then, you know, when we were doing hooks and books. Can I turn this on?
Yeah, there's a foot pedal thing on it.
Oh. This reminds me of Stop Making Sense. Everyone knows Stop Making Sense? Talking Heads. Okay, so do you want to say anything about hooks and books?
I'll come to the mic rather than fight that thing.
Yeah.
So Chadd's going to read a story. I know what the story is, and so I've selected a fly pattern to embellish that story, to support it, to interpret it. Very good. Yeah. So in this particular story, he's fishing in a lake, and there are insects in the lake, aquatic insects. This one happens to be called a damselfly. Anybody familiar with damselflies? They're like a miniature dragonfly. You can picture that. And this phase of that insect is the underwater larva. And so I'll be crafting a damselfly larva while Chadd stuns you with this incredible story. Is that good, Chadd? Did I do good?
And a couple things. The ideal of the performance is that I finish the story as soon as, or maybe we finish together.
And in the 6 years we've been doing this from Helena to Ephraim, I think that's happened once.
Maybe twice.
I saw it when it happened.
You were there.
It was perfect.
Yeah. So if that happens, then then your experience, I think, is even more enhanced. Okay, so this is called the Summer of Bill. Yeah. Yeah, if the camera stops, times out, or something, just let us know and we'll turn it back on. It's a really kind of rickety system. Can everybody see the TV? Is it kind of bright? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Summer of Bill. One morning in early July, I got a text from Bill. He told me he wanted to take his boat out on Daniels Reservoir to fish for the big rainbow trout. My wife says I'm too old to take the boat out by myself, Bill texted. Are you interested? I prefer to go during the week, but can be flexible on that. Is there a day that works for you? Daniels is a reservoir of about 1 square mile on the Little Malad River in Idaho. It has a long-standing artificials-only regulation, a barbless hook rule, and a slot limit. I'd heard it was squirming with trophy rainbows, and I'd never fished there before, but I sure as hell wanted to. So I tried to sound not too eager. Yeah, Bill, I could probably take a day off and maybe head out with you. A few more texts and we'd agreed on a Tuesday, 1 week hence. Bill texted, can you be here at 5:30 sharp? In the morning, I joked. Yes, he replied. I'd like to get there at 7. Now, if you're going to spend a long day in a small boat with someone, it's important that you both know about sarcasm. It comes in handy if you want to say, great cast, or nice fish, without really meaning it. I was ready to overlook the possibility that Bill was impervious to irony, but there was another, more peculiar problem. I didn't know Bill. I had no idea who this guy was. Sure, I texted back. 5:30 it is. I looked up Bill on social media and was surprised to discover that he and I were already friends. However, scrolling through his content only deepened the enigma. There were photos of Wyoming and Arizona and even the Galapagos Islands, but all the fishing photos involved spinning rods and grandkids, and the one close-up photo of Bill didn't ring a single bell. Bill and I had no online friends in common, and my real-life friends had never heard of it. On Monday, Bill texted, we still on for tomorrow at 5:30? Sure, Bill, but let me ask you a question. Who the hell are you? That's not what I texted. It was way too late for that. Instead, I texted, yes, sir, see you then, looking forward to it. The way Bill kept dropping our precise start time into his text suggested I'd better be on time, so I got to his house at 5:25 a.m. It was still dark. Who was this guy? I had to assume that Bill's online photo was simply too outdated for me to recognize, or maybe it was too recent, or maybe there was something essential but unphotographable about Bill that I'd instantly recall on seeing him face to face. But it wasn't any of that. I just didn't know him. Bill met me out on his driveway, clean-shaven, dungarees, silver hair, perhaps 20 years my senior. He was friendly. In the glow of the porch light, we shook hands. "Nice to see you again," said Bill. "It's been a while." "Yes," I said. "Too long." I stole glances at Bill as I loaded my gear into his vehicle, worried that I'd blow my cover. He fiddled with the tie-down straps on his boat trailer, but everything was already ready, and obviously had been since the day before. Then he offered me a cup of coffee, and as soon as we set out on State Highway 30 for Idaho, it was official. I was on an all-day fishing trip with a total stranger. But the mystery didn't last. I finally confessed. "Bill, I feel embarrassed, but I can't remember how we first met." He knew he'd had me at a disadvantage from the start, so he chuckled kindly and unriddled the matter. He was a retiree from Arizona who summered in northern Utah, a summer citizen we called them. Many years earlier, he explained, he'd attended a Single Trout Unlimited meeting where I'd made a presentation about fishing on the Blacksmith Fork. After the meeting, Bill had introduced himself and asked me if I wanted to go fishing sometime. Then he'd waited something like a decade to follow up. "I feel bad it's taken this long," he said, "but I appreciate you being available." So began the summer of Bill. I still didn't really know him, but there was time for that. Once I volunteered to wade into the lake and help him untrailer the boat, and after I'd established myself as a capable and punctual first mate, Bill would put me on speed dial, and we'd be on Daniels hauling in Trophy Rainbow every few days all summer long. I rested easy in the passenger seat as we crossed into Idaho. The final leg of the drive zigzagged over two-lane farm roads and up a canyon almost 30 minutes northwest of the tiny village of Malad, which itself was an hour's drive from its largest neighbor, Pocatello, population of only 60,000. So although the reservoir was surrounded by rolling dry farm ag fields, it felt quite remote. Bill pointed out the original site of the reservoir, a few miles south of where it is now. The old dam is a hulking ruin of concrete and blackened iron spanning a narrow place in the valley. The faint remnants of a historic shoreline inscribed the hillsides around what is now many acres of cow pasture. I pictured boats gliding across the missing water and soaring over the backs of the grazing cattle. We reached the boat ramp at 7 a.m. "Hey, we made great time," beamed Bill. He backed the boat into the lake. It was a 14-foot riveted aluminum outfit with plastic swiveling seats and an 8-horsepower outboard motor. I waded down the ramp into the water and braced the boat so that Bill could board without getting wet. Then I shoved off and vaulted with a splash into the bow. The Bear River Watershed is home to nearly 100 reservoirs, most of them on tributaries, and most covering a square mile or less. Almost all were constructed for irrigation or hydroelectric power for the sugar beet industry, the economic heart of the region in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Today, these reservoirs are more notable for their non-native sport fish species. Porcupine Reservoir in the south holds kokanee salmon. Oneida in the north has walleye. Newton has tiger muskie. Cutler holds bass, bullhead, perch, and other offspring of illicit bucket stockings that go back a century. As I smelled the outboard exhaust and watched the keel parting the glassy water, I recalled a summer of camping many years before with my sons, Klaus and Shreve, at Newton Reservoir, a lake of just 350 acres on Clarkson Creek. Our little boat, which we christened the Aquabat, drew a shallower draft but was functionally identical to Bill's. Shreve and Klaus were probably 8 and 10 years old at the time. We'd launched the Aquabat at daybreak and caught perch and bass and even a few small tiger muskies. Later in the day, the fishing slowed, but we kept at it, sunburnt and languishing in the broiling aluminum shell. That evening, after Dutch oven chicken for dinner, we took the boat out again with a small electric camping lantern. It wasn't as bright as a real crappie light, but we anchored up in a cove, set one of the oars athwart in the oar locks, and hung the light out over the water from an oar handle. Little minnows and baby fish are attracted to bright lights at night, I told the boys, so they'll swim up to our light and hopefully some bigger fish will follow. The boys cast their jigs over, peering over the side with an anticipation indistinguishable from actual fear, unsure of what might emerge from the eerily green glowing water. They didn't have to wait long to find out. Small perch hit our lures right away. Bigger fish followed. I tried a woolly bugger and hooked a 16-inch smallmouth. We hooked up doubles and at least one triple. For an hour, scarcely a minute passed when one of us wasn't reeling in a fish. It was the kind of truly abundant fishing that permanently binds young anglers to the sport. In the habit of rivers, Ted Leeson asserts, with very few firm exceptions, fishing from boats holds little appeal. It has a certain industrial quality about it, a no-nonsense fixation on the business of catching fish. I understand what he means, especially with regard to drift boats. There might never be a more absurdly elaborate and extravagant human contrivance as the drift boat. It is exhaustively engineered and exquisitely manufactured, as expensive as certain factory new automobiles, and built for the exclusive purpose of capturing trout and immediately letting them go again. But fishing from an old tin boat like Bill's is something totally unlike the other kinds of fishing, something that might feel nostalgic, even if you've never done it before. A summer day in such a boat sears itself into the memory. Bill sat in the aft seat, wearing a hopeful expression as he steered us toward Daniel's northeastern shore. The sun stood a few degrees above the horizon. Bill cut the motor and we glided to a stop. The bank was lined with reeds. Bleached branches of inundated trees rose from the water like skeletal fingers. Bill pointed at a reef of submerged aquatic vegetation. Last year about this time we were catching them like crazy on damselfly nymphs all along this line of weeds here. I didn't see any adult damselflies, but I tied on a nymph and cast to the weeds, no takers. We tried other flies and nymphs without success. Between guesses about why the fish weren't biting, we spoke of our family and jobs. Like many retired guys, Bill had lots to say about things like the high cost of prescription medication, gasoline, and recreational fees. He wasn't quite old enough to be my grandpa. He was probably younger than my dad, but he was a classic American grandfather, affable from a distance, more avuncular than fatherly, and grimly devoted to punctuality, despite having no place to be and all day to arrive. I thought of my grandpa Oscar, who reportedly began teaching me to fish when I was 3. His boat was an 18-foot fiberglass hydrodyne with a canvas bimini top, wrap-around windshield, and a teal and white hull trimmed in chrome. It looked more like an amphibious 57 Chevy Bel Air than a fishing outfit. It looked more like an amphibious 57 Chevy Bel Air than a fishing outfit, but in that boat among the coves of Arizona's Lake Havasu, Grandpa Oscar taught me to bait a hook, jig for bluegill, troll for stripers, and toss topwater poppers to weed beds for smallmouth. My grandpa's tug of choice was big fat catfish, which he tempted with homemade stink bait, the recipe for which he evidently guarded so jealously that he took it to his grave rather than passing it on to me, his own protege. I know at least that it contained Velveeta, pureed chicken giblets, and Jim Beam. Ingredients guessed at based on the stultifying aroma included buttermilk and chewing tobacco. It was mixed in a steel Folgers can and left in the garage to ripen in the Arizona heat, which in the summertime started at pizza oven and often rose to equator of planet Mercury. When the bait was sufficiently gangrenous, it took on the purplish black iridescence of congealed motor oil, a noxious biscuit dough with the reek of Limburger cheese. Bill allowed the boat to drift unanchored to cover more water. When we floated over weeds or shallows, Bill started up the motor and backed into open water. Between casts, he furrowed his brow and scanned the water, as though suspecting we were on the wrong lake. Not sure why we're not catching him, Bill apologized. Last time we were here, we were hooking nice fish, about every 5 minutes. We navigated to a new expanse. 19 feet deep here, Bill announced, peering at the tiny monitor of his fish finder. Weedy bottom. I'm marking fish down there. Contrary to my typical attitude, the shortage of fish had yet to occur to me as a crisis. I worked my half of the water in a hot, sleepy daze, casting a wet fly, letting it descend, and then lazily retrieving before the fly contacted the weeds. Meditating, really. We hooked a few small rainbows. I set down my fly rod and opened a beer. The bottle sweated in the heat. The heat settled into the boat, and the boat rocked in the water. The water galunked against the hull. Time passed imperceptibly. The sun hung in the heat just below its zenith for what seemed like hours. Summertime seeped into my bones. And there came to mind a Polaroid I once saw in an album belonging to Oscar's sister. This was years ago, but even then the photo was so faded it was mostly pale hues of red and green. I was a toddler in the photo, standing on the prow of Oscar's hydrodyne, which was nosed up onto a gravelly beach. My grandma, probably in her 50s, stood next to the boat holding up a massive bass she'd caught, and she was lipping the fish like a pro. Remarkable not because she landed it, she was as competent an angler as Oscar, but because, although the fish must have weighed 10 pounds, she effortlessly hoisted it high enough to compare its length to my height, and the bass was only slightly shorter than I was. My earliest memory of fishing is a trip with Grandpa Oscar to Kaibab Lake in northern Arizona. I couldn't have been much older than 6. Like Daniel's Reservoir, Kaibab is small and it sits high in the mountains and it holds trout. But at first, nobody caught any. While my grandpa presumably worked methodically through his warm water arsenal of rapalas, rooster tails, and rubber worms, I sat in the back of the boat, occupying myself with a coffee can full of pinyon seeds. Big red coffee cans figure significantly in my fishing memories. They held not only stink bait, but also night crawlers and live bait fish, busted lures Oscar planned to salvage, and in this case, pinyon seeds I gathered that morning from around our campsite. I don't recall why I collected them, and I can say even less about why I brought them fishing, but I spent much of that day dropping the seeds one by one over the stern. The water was clear enough to see almost to the bottom. I hunched over the gunnel, my face only a foot above the water, watching each seed spiral down until it didn't so much recede from view as slowly fade away. This was evidently enough to keep me content. Later on, Grandpa caught a big fish. This is my first recollection of trout. I'd surely seen paintings and photos of trout in magazines, but there in the boat I could only stare at the sleek, gleaming fish. It lacked the spiny fins, heavy scales, and toadish grimace of bass and other warm water species I was better acquainted with. Hammocked heavily in the net, the trout flashed prismatically like a torpedo fashioned from diamonds and chrome. "That's a rainbow trout," said my grandpa. He didn't have to explain why it was called that. Bill had planned to fish until 2 o'clock, but we stayed on the water until 4, waiting for the fish to start biting. They finally did. As the sun declined, the damselflies emerged on force, and the rainbows leaped clear of the water for them. I tried on an adult pattern and hooked a 16-inch rainbow. Bill caught several good fish. But the summer of Bill ended up being just that one mostly just that one trip. I got busy with yard work. Bill had medical appointments and grandkids. We went back to Daniels that September, but then Bill returned to Arizona. This is not to say I was disappointed. Just before we turned for shore, I set my hook on what I knew was a fine rainbow. I locked the fly line under my index finger and hastily reeled in my slack. "I think this might be a bigger one," I said, over my shoulder. Bill reached for the net. The trout was at first only a silvery blur in the murk, 2 fathoms down. He refused to come up, even to leap. Eventually, I played him to the boat, but he bolted at the sight of the net. I carefully raised him back up, but he went on the drag again when the net reappeared. At last, he jumped, shimmied stiffly in the air for an instant, and landed on the water with a clap. Bill got the net under him. The trout measured a half an inch shy of 20 inches, the reservoir's slot limit. To all appearances, he was the same trout I'd seen on my grandpa's boat that day on Kaibab. The trout glistened blindingly in the sun, and the summer of Bill seared itself into my memory. I lifted the rainbow from the net and lowered him into the water. With a lash of his tail, the big trout raised a splash and vanished into the deep. Thanks. Okay, so it didn't happen that time. We're going to try really hard on the next one. I think what it is you're just so entranced with the story you don't realize how long it is, Tim. I think that's what's happening. I'm casting a spell on you. I'm casting my spell on you.
The whole point of tying flies is to become proficient and fast and economical with your movements, and I can only drag it out so far. and I do enjoy listening to Chadd read too, so there's a little bit of that.
Tell people to get coffee.
Anyone want coffee? While we're... And drinks.
And water.
So this next one is called the Audition, and it's about fishing with people who you're maybe a little bit intimidated by, people who who are better at fishing or more professional. And I'm going to let Tim explain what he's going to tie for this one.
We happened to do these 2 stories down at the Utah Arts Festival in Salt Lake a few weeks ago, and there weren't as many people, and we had a battle of the bands going on either side. At one point, Chadd was shouting into the microphone as he was reading. So this is nice. But this particular story takes place on an unnamed stream. I think it's unnamed, right? Unnamed stream where there is a species of trout that come up out of the lower river to spawn, and these are quite large fish and hungry. And so the fly I'm going to tie on this reading is imitating kind of a generic small fish, maybe 3 inches long or so. So just leave it at that.
Yeah, so this is the other story that I've got for you. Thank you for coming. We thank you very, very much. As Tim mentioned, we were at the Utah Arts Fest a little while ago, and it was fun. But the crowd was a little bit smaller. We're just having a little bit of trouble attracting fans of literary work to Arts Fest, rather than 17-person drum corps, performances. Yeah, it was really loud. So this is beautiful. It's nice. Thank you, Star and Brittany, for having us here. Like I said, this will be our last thing. If you want a book, just approach me later, and we've got a couple of flies to give you. Maybe if you're an angler or if you are a fan of the fly tying, the art of fly tying, come on up. So this is called the Audition. When a newcomer is invited to fish with a group of anglers who've already fished together, it might seem like more than just a fishing trip. To the newcomer, I mean. The performance, evaluation, and rendered judgment might make it feel like an audition. I took a trip like that to Wyoming. There were 3 of them and 1 of me. First, there was Paul, a fish biologist with the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources. Paul was a tall, affable Midwesterner. I'd met him a few times before, but so had every other angler I knew. Paul was known throughout the region for his river and trout conservation work. Next was Jim, another fish biologist. He worked for Trout Unlimited and had likewise spearheaded many stream conservation projects. With his blocky beard and shock of black hair, Jim bore a slight resemblance to a young Abraham Lincoln. I knew Jim too, but never thought I'd ever fish with him. He was as famous, if not more so, than Paul. Then came Tyler, who was not a fish biologist, but was studying to become one, and in the meantime happened to be a fishing guide of some acclaim. Tyler was stocky and talkative, with a face so boyish I initially underestimated his age by 10 years. Lastly, there was me, newcomer guy. My credentials, well, I fly fished at times. Why had I been invited? I figured some angler of superior caliber had passed away unexpectedly, and the need for a replacement had grown urgent. Jim was kind enough not to specify, but I didn't care. This was new, unknown trout water, a tributary of the Bear River. It's one of the few places in the watershed where you can catch fluvial Bonneville cutthroats, Jim said. 16 to 20 inches, some bigger. That was all I needed to hear. Fluvial trout are those whose life history involves migration from a large main stem river up into smaller tributaries for spawning. These far-roving trout grow larger and stronger than the trout that remain resident in a single stream. Fluvial Bonnevilles are scarce in the Bear River watershed because human-made obstructions, such as dams, prevent the fish from moving freely between the main stem and its tributaries. Fluvial trout are found only where a healthy section of the Bear River connects to a healthy, high-elevation tributary, and that's where we were going. I had several concerns. These other guys had all fished the stream before. Furthermore, Jim said we'd be swinging big articulated streamers, kind of like this, which wasn't my favorite technique, by which I mean I'm not very good at it. This is to say nothing of my nasty tailing loop and a track record for getting conspicuously skunked on trips where the fishing is supposed to be superb. I'd even been accused once or twice of being a bad luck charm. Nevertheless, I made the long drive over obscure state highways and up twisting, kidney-busting, packed earth roads to the stream. It was late June. We arrived at our campsite just after 10 in the morning. As we broke out our waders and fly rods, I heard Tyler talking to Paul about their previous trip to the stream, where they'd landed fish bigger than 20 inches. Soon they were coolly assessing me, asking me where I fished. like the small talk before a job interview. To burnish my credentials, I tried divulging some of my top secret waters. I asked them, you guys ever fish at, and I named a couple of my top secret spots. Paul nodded impassively. Tyler shrugged and said, yeah, I fish there all the time. I hastily dropped the names of a couple other places. They remained unmoved, and that was the entirety of my top secret fishing spots. Fortunately, Paul and Tyler had their fly rods set up and waders on. Being the first to make ready, Paul got to choose between the upstream and downstream sections. He claimed the downstream, which could only mean it was the more productive of the two. Jim attempted to coordinate our itinerary while we were all still together. So, you want to meet back here for dinner, he asked, or for lunch? Do we know where we want to fish later tonight? Paul and Tyler were practically fishing already, standing alongside Paul's truck and reaching for the door handle. Paul muttered, sure, yeah, and then they left. When we suited up, Jim and I got into my truck and headed for the upstream section. Jim pointed and said, let's start here and leapfrog down to where Paul and Tyler are. That should take most of the rest of the day. Sounds perfect, I said, not really knowing whether it was or not. There were no trails, so we plunged into the dense brush that flanked the stream. We out of focus? Whippy branches zinged on our waders and slapped us in the face. We circled and backtracked through the brush, holding our rods up like radio aerials to keep them from tangling. It took forever to push through, but I feigned nonchalance, as though catching fish was something I was interested in only slightly. I felt like the audition was off to a bad start. Paul and Tyler had a lengthy lead. They fished the upstream section where the fishing was better, and I hadn't even gotten a good look at the stream yet. When at last we reached the water's edge, we found a magnificent trout stream, meandering gently through the willow breaks and pine thickets. The stream channel was seldom wider than 10 yards, but each bend enwrapped a deep, enticing pool. The fast, shallow water was ever so slightly milky, while the deeper, slower water was teal and indigo. Undercut banks and overhanging brush brooded above the innumerable shady hiding places. I left Jim and hiked 100 yards downstream, stationing myself at the upstream end of a bend. Then I cast a tungsten-head streamer across the channel and mended the line furiously. The streamer vanished into the shadowy indigo of the bend. I didn't want to miss the day's first bite to inattention, so as the fly passed through the bottom of the swing, I readied myself for a heavy tug, but the streamer surfaced unmolested at the far end. I shrugged and repeated the cast, this time mending it even more furiously. This was like an art fest, pretty much. I was again alert to the strike, but no strike came. It went on like this for a few bends. After about 30 minutes, Jim came up behind me. Anything, he asked? From his dire cheerfulness, I inferred that he'd already been catching fish. Nah, I replied, not even a bite. Am I doing this right? I shot a cast across the channel and mended the line. The bend was as blue as the heart of a massive sapphire. The streamer swam into it. Yeah, said Jim. That's the same thing I'm doing. My streamer emerged again unbothered. I gestured testily at this bend. Shouldn't there be fish in there? Yeah, said Jim with a chuckle. Looks perfect, but like I said, these are fluvial fish. They don't have the density of resident fish. I haven't caught any yet either. Maybe they're moving back downstream already. I was relieved to hear this, the part about the density, not that Jim hadn't caught any. It seemed like the audition wasn't a complete disaster yet, so I told Jim I'd skip 2 bends down and try again. Sure, he replied merrily, waving me forward. Don't worry, we'll start catching them here soon. I came to a riffle running between overhanging banks and trailed the streamer into the best-looking seams, trying to avoid letting my focus lapse, the way I often did on days of such slow fishing. No fish came to the fly, so I crossed the riffle and cast from that side. The fly drifted into a dark lie beneath a hedge of willows with boughs that trailed into the current. No strike. I sighed and let the streamer drift a little farther down so that it wouldn't hook the willows as I retrieved it, and that's when something hit the fly. The strike had surprised me after all. But the fish came tight anyway and gave me several minutes of panic by running into some heavy current. I stumbled after him, reeling in my slack, then I ferried him across the channel and banked him on a gravel bar. It was a fluvial bonneville, just shy of 18 inches. Fluvial trout are sought after mainly because they grow larger than resident trout. Most anglers would rather catch a 20-inch cutthroat than a 10-inch one. But there is something more beguiling about fluvial bonnebills than their size. They are the elusive relics, descendants of the indigenous cutthroat population that once superabounded throughout this watershed. I just hooked a second cutthroat when Jim came up to me again. I reported my catch and showed off my shaky photos. Jim still hadn't caught a fish, but he grinned and said, "Guess they're still up here." I'm not a big fan of scorekeeping while fishing. It feels self-important. Plus, it makes it hard to exaggerate later on. I did feel good that I was at least on the scoreboard, but even so, I caught fewer than one fish per hour, meaning I could fish until midnight without breaking into double digits. Despite its remoteness and lack of angling pressure, this stream was not easy to fish. Many of the insanely promising pools produced no trout, and I spooked several lunkers from spots where I was sure no sensible fish would hide out. By the end of the day, I'd managed to catch several fluvial cutthroats, seven fluvial cutthroats in the upstream section. It wasn't a remarkable number, but I hadn't been skunked, and I hadn't brought any bad luck to anyone. Jim caught only 2 or 3, likely because he yielded so much good water to me. I think he also spent much of the day inspecting the stream in an official capacity. He'd completed many stream improvement projects in the vicinity. It was the only way streams like this could remain in existence. Constant coordination, negotiation, and cooperation between landowners, government agencies, and the public. We returned to our campsite around 5 o'clock, and I prepared for the tallying of totals and the final evaluation that was to come. For reasons that should be obvious, I brought enough cold beer and Louisiana hot links for everyone. After distributing these blandishments, I took a seat at the fire pit. Paul sat next to me and offered me a cigar. I don't smoke, but I debated whether I should maybe start. He lit a cigar and champed it contemplatively before asking, "So, how was it?" "Great," said Jim. "It was all right," I hedged. "I only caught 7, but they were all phenomenal." "Well," said Paul, "that's as many as anyone else caught." I turned to face him. "Seriously?" Paul nodded. "Yeah, I think I'm at 5. I got 6, said Tyler with a shrug. For 10 fleeting seconds, the scoreboard showed that I had outfished the 3 of them. I mean, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with scorekeeping. But then Tyler offhandedly mentioned that they'd caught multiple fish bigger than 20 inches, whereas none of mine had even exceeded 19. I inwardly conceded that even one 20-inch Bonneville cutthroat, wild and native, was enough to offset my narrow numerical lead, and I was recalculating the standings when it dawned on me that all my fussing over catch totals was immaterial and maybe even somewhat gauche to Paul and Jim and Tyler. They didn't care. They never did regard me as a newcomer, and there had been no audition. Apparently it was just a fishing trip. I exhaled and settled into my camp chair. We ate the hot links and drank the beer and made plans to go back and fish until dark. Jim had, of course, already let me know that there was no need for tallies and totals. It was early that afternoon when he caught up to me after I'd hooked a couple fish, but I hadn't been listening. I had allowed my focus to lapse. "Pretty amazing," Jim had said. He looked downstream and trailed one hand in the current. A stream like this, cold, basically pristine, high-functioning, main stem connected, with fluvial cuts. I could have caught 1 trout or 21. It didn't matter. Not many streams like this, Jim added, and it just goes on for miles. Thanks.
We did pretty well, Chadd. I only finished a couple minutes before you. But I wanted to ask, did anyone see the fly land on the fly? Just at the end there, a house fly landed on my side. How appropriate.
Yeah, thanks again. How about a hand for Tim King? Inimitable. Often imitated, never dominated. Mountain man of Cache Valley. I guess I'm going to throw it back over to Russ Beck. Thank you so much for coming. We were I think we were about this close to making a bet on how many people would come, and Tim's bet was 5, and I think mine was 6.5. So I win. Thank you again.
With Donnie Owens.
Woo!
Okay, awesome. And then when he's done, JP is going to come up, okay? We'll go to that point, okay?
Hey, while Donnie is coming, does anyone want a damselfly nymph or a really sweet, meaty... Okay. Is that a hand? I can't. I'm squinting. Up here? Okay, one for you and over there. Come meet me.
All right. I'm a very subpar fisherman, but that really made me want to go up on the water. So that was amazing. That was great. My name's Donnie. I am a suburban dad in training. I don't have any kids. I'm just training to be a dad. You know, the jokes, the finger guns, all the good things that go with that. And I also write spoken word poetry. So this is a love poem. The more we try to restrain love, to define it like a fixed experiment, to lure it out of a dictionary and close the door forever, we realize that love is never as simple as we think, never as catchy as baby don't hurt me no more. It's a topic whose weight deserves complexity, whose definition demands diversity. So why are we put into a perfectly pre-measured box when we speak about love of country? Warm apple pie on a white picket fenced windowsill, a soldier gearing up, a rifle in one hand, a shaky tremble in the other, as the sun rises over unfamiliar terrain. A multitude of flags strewn about on a day in July that is always just a little too hot for a 4-hour parade. The eager yet uneven chorus of the national anthem reverberating through a school gymnasium at halftime. 3 colors solemnly draped over a polished casket, much too small to hold the bravery concealed within. We are told that these are the correct answers to the query, what does it mean to love thy country? I'm not here today to tell you that those definitions are incorrect, but I do believe they are incomplete. After all, why should we be restricted to only acknowledging the parts of our country plastered into children's school books? Bright, unwavering, unquestioned. After all, when has love ever been purchased without the tax of included heartbreak? Maybe, just maybe, we could acknowledge that for many, love of country today holds hands with the difficult knowledge of where we were yesterday. For many, memories of their grandfather, or cross-stitched into tattered retellings of Vietnam, into visages of the young men that the American dream drafted into a nightmare. For many who arrive home from barren truck stop diners and suffocating Midwestern coal mines, a hand on the heart doesn't keep food on the table any more than their jobs do. For many, the stars and stripes are not just fabric, they are symbolic of the values which a loved one gave the last full measure described by Lincoln so long ago. For many, the outrage following a kneeling athlete is dwarfed by the frequent fear that their child's name will be next to a hashtag trending. For many, they know that the color of their skin, the language in their throat may always be perceived as a contradiction to their American identity. For many, years spent patrolling dusty encampments aren't as easily reminisced when the trauma included in that service brings homelessness and self-pity. For all, the ever-changing state of the country is a cause of concern. For all, we rest our heads at night frightened of and for that land in which we raise our children. For all, we know that to disagree, and to disagree powerfully, is indeed American. But we all want our country to survive. The country that, notwithstanding its overdue promises and complex casualties, has provided us a home. The country in which American pride and patriotic belief act as cough medicine to soothe battered lungs, still trying to sing along to God Bless America. The same country in which belief begins to turn to self-righteousness. Medicine turns into an addiction. The high turns into a hatred for anyone who didn't check the same November ballot boxes we did. Maybe after a decisive election, we can stop seeing each other as red or blue check marks, as colors without consequence. Maybe we can refute any definition of patriotism that requires us to hate our neighbors, any concept of love that prevents us from hearing the cries of another, however different they may sound from our own. Maybe we can allow it all to swell within us. The painful history of inequality, the often overlooked legacy of military inhumanity, a delicate knowledge of where we've been, a nervous anticipation for where we could be, an earned anxiety for where we are now, solidarity amid the rubble of 9/11 when words failed but our resolve didn't, a silent symphony of forever sleeping service members finally flying home to their families, a cadence cacophony of hands clasping against hearts, of knees softly touching the ground, both loving their country in a way in which they know how to. Tears that flow freely, mixing with every shade of red, white, and blue in a national color palette as we ask whatever God we worship to bless America. And that I love will stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above.
for a musical performance tonight as well. All right, I just got one poem for y'all tonight. It's just a childhood memory poem. It's titled The Apricot Tree. Also, can you hear me okay? Is this working?
Yeah.
Awesome. I was 4 or 5 when my mother brought me down to the neighborhood apricot tree. We spent a good hour collecting apricot after apricot after apricot, and I remember how groovy leaves tickled my hands as I plucked sweet, sweet treats from a narrow branch. I remember being in awe of how there was as much orange as there was green, how I stood under its canopy, imagining all the things an apricot could be. A crisp, a tart, a pie. The possibilities were as endless as the fruit, and at some point I decided, let's bake a pie. And my mother took me home and blanched and pitted and quartered each apricot. I helped roll a crust. After my mother lifted our creation from the oven, we each downed a warm slice of gooey, tangy magic. I was 20 or 21 when I walked back to the apricot tree. I wanted to recreate that pie, or maybe try making a crisp or tart, but the August air felt cold and stale, like the possibilities were vanishing. By the time I arrived, the tree was no more than a black stump.
All right, thank you so much. That was fantastic. Okay, so we have 2 more readers. I think we could do maybe a couple more if anybody wants to. There's still space. Just throwing that out there. You don't have to. It's okay. Okay. All right. If nobody else feels the spirit, we'll just hear from Alex Reese and Tim Peterson. And now we'll close the night for us. I just want to thank one more time everybody who's involved. Thanks for the supplies of liquid. That's where I'm at, I guess. Thanks for the coffee and the sodas up there. Thanks for all the behind-the-scenes work of bringing in the speakers and everything like that. It's so appreciated. I'm so grateful that Helicon West is still a thing. It makes me very happy. So, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Me too, because I'm... All right. Please, let's continue. Okay, just a reminder, Chadd is going to be selling books after this, so please go up and give him some of that sweet, sweet cash. And we also have a tip jar if you just want to tip me. So, okay, so we'll hear from Alex and then Tim, and then I think we'll call it a night unless somebody else signs up. Okay, thanks all. Have a good night. So. Alex, it is you. You even put your last name on it. Okay, it's so good to see you. It's so good to see you. Brent, did I miss anything, or do we need to do anything else?
Just tell them about next time.
Okay, next time, remind me. When is it?
Next time is October 14th at the Hiram City Elite Hall. Water Stories will be the featured readers. It was a writing workshop put on by with the Bear River Heritage Area and Emerson James, and there will be a bunch of featured readers and open mic. So,
Yay.
yep.
Okay. October 14th.
Yes.
Hiram. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, very good.
All right, hi everyone, I'm Alex. My maiden last name is Bullock, so some of you might know me as Alex Bullock, but now I'm Alex Reese. That's why I put both of them. So I just finished my master's in ancient languages and cultures. And I decided that I really wanted to rework a poem that I wrote in my undergrad and then translate it into Latin. So what I'm going to read for you is the English poem, don't worry, and then I'm going to read it in Latin, and then I'm going to do sort of like a little reprise at the end. That won't be musical, sorry. But okay, so I'm gonna just go ahead then.
Hey, Alex, can you pull the mic down just an inch?
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay. All I know is it starts with you. Ultimately, I go back to wasted starlight. My feet are crescent moons, pale and spooning each other, they click together in the sheets like flint. In any second, this house, the bed could catch fire. From here on, it's instinctual. Do you get it yet? Someone let your ghost in last night. This time, his snore was a tiger's. His arms curled around me, striped with shadow. The time before, he called me beautiful, with a smile and a drawl. Once he was an incubus with a brain of tar, complementing a sour milk heart. The taste of them all stained my teeth like black coffee, a bitter resin of burnt memories. Do you get it yet? From here on, it's instinctual. Omne quod scio est quod incipit tecum. Ultime ad perditum lumen sideris refero. Mei pedis sunt corniculantes Dianae, polentes et complexes suos, percutient in lentea sicut cotes. Cumque lictus escandescant, a modo est inatus, etiam dum adsequeris? Aliquis tuam imaginem admissit proxima nocte, illo stertia erat tigris. Brachia sibi crispans, circa me clavatus migrantes. I only have half of it on my notepad and the other half on my phone. Priori tempori locavit me luculena, subriso et acento. Olim erat strix terebreo bituminis. Germinato for fermenti lactis. Sapor forum omnium cloaca morsus meos sicut cafea nigrita. Aqua racina crematarum. Memoriolarum. Etiam dum obsequeris. All beyond the equinox, from you to me exactly halfway, equal parts of night and day. From here on, it's instinctual. Do you get it yet?
Ooh.
I don't encounter Tims very often, so hi Tim. Nice job on those flies. So, since it's Halloween time, and I love Halloween time, I decided to have some horror haikus. I have to fit something creepy into one sentence, so hopefully you feel some goosebumps or maybe a small sliver down your spine, hopefully. Click, click, guns empty, a mob of chomping teeth come, undead choke my cry. I hide, paralyzed, my heart sprints in terror. A hand grabs me, gotcha! The pond hosted leeches, wriggling mass, sucking me dry, no swimming. My chainsaw screams to life. My big bad bully, bound, cries mercy, out of stock.
Oh.
Empty asylum. I sprint from a specter who screams, "Back in your room!"
All right, last chance. I can't see anybody, so you have to come up if you... all right, I'm going to pretend like nobody's coming up, even if you are, I guess. So, okay, very good. Thank you all. What a beautiful night. Thanks for coming out and supporting Helicon West. We'll see you in Hiram in a couple of weeks. Okay, thanks all. Have a good night.